Over the last few years, I've noticed there's an absolute insane amount of hate directed towards Cory Matthews from Boy Meets World, and I wanted to make this video in defense of the boy. And let me be clear, Cory Matthews is absolutely insanely annoying. He overreacts, oversteps his boundaries, and makes a lot of bad decisions. But this idea that he's some sort of toxic manipulator is just a little bit too far.
Too far! God!
And I already know the first comment people are going to make. You're just excusing bad behavior. But let's go through the actual scenes. First thing people forget, Boy Meets World started in the 1990s, over 30 years ago. And the way people talk about relationships, emotional behavior, and even fictional characters has completely changed since then. So it's very easy now to go back, zoom in on an isolated moments, and apply modern internet labels like toxic, narcissist, manipulative to a 90s sitcom written for a completely different audience. Now, before someone comments, bad behavior is bad behavior no matter what the decade. That is true, but context still matters when you're interpreting intent versus impact. Point 1. The Lauren arc is not a cheating storyline. People say Cory cheated and built a pattern around it. Here's what actually happened. Cory meets Lauren, they bond emotionally at the ski lodge, they kiss once, Cory immediately feels guilty, the situation collapses. Now, I know that people will say, he still cheated, one kiss is enough. That is definitely fair, and I do agree with that to a certain extent. But the difference is, this is not a repeated pattern, not deception over time, not a hidden double life. It was a single mistake during teenage years. And then there's the letter. This is the part people always bring up, and it's honestly the hardest part of the entire defense, because Cory handles this absolutely terribly. When Lauren sends him the letter, he doesn't immediately tell Topanga about it. That was wrong. I can't really pretend or defend this otherwise, but people often point to this moment as proof that Cory is manipulative and calculating. What I see here is a teenager who already knows he messed up, is terrified of losing the person he loves, and makes another bad decision trying to avoid the consequences of the first one. It's dishonest, it's immature, it's cowardly. But there's a huge difference between a kid panicking after making a mistake and someone deliberately manipulating people for personal gain. And then things get even worse when Lauren comes to Philadelphia, because now the problem Cory was trying to avoid is standing right in front of him. Topanga finds out Lauren is there in person, and Cory is forced to deal with the reality of what he did. What's important is that Lauren's visit doesn't lead to some secret relationship or ongoing romance. It actually forces a choice. Cory chooses Topanga, the entire situation blows up in his face. Topanga gets hurt, Lauren gets hurt, Cory gets hurt, nobody walks away happy. The show treats it as a mistake that damaged a relationship, not some moment he's supposed to get away with. And that's the important distinction, because my argument isn't that Cory was innocent. He wasn't. My argument is that people take one of the worst mistakes he's ever made and use it to define his entire character. This is probably the second biggest argument. People say Cory is controlling, and honestly, there are moments where I understand why people feel this way. One of the basic examples is Shawn and Angela. Shawn, Hunter, and Angela are constantly struggling with communication, commitment, and Shawn's fear of getting hurt. And Cory absolutely oversteps. There's even a point where he basically forces situations because he's desperate for them to work things out. Does he overstep? 100%. No argument there. But intent matters, because Cory isn't trying to control Shawn's life. He's trying to save Shawn from himself. And if you watch the entire show, you know exactly why. For 7 seasons, Cory watches Shawn sabotage opportunities, push people away from stability, and convince himself he doesn't deserve good things. So yes, Cory becomes pretty overbearing, but overbearing and manipulative aren't the same thing. One comes from concern, the other comes from control. Then of course we have the famous Yale argument. This one's brought up constantly. People say Cory held Topanga back from Yale, but that's not really what happens. What happens is Cory reacts emotionally when he realizes the person he's built his entire future around might be leaving. And honestly, it feels like a pretty realistic reaction for an 18-year-old. He's scared, he's insecure, and he's definitely immature. But eventually he comes to the conclusion that Topanga should do what's best for her future. In fact, he literally tells her that. People often remember his emotional reaction. They forget the part where he actually lets her go. He did actually break up with her, just to clarify that as well. Because influence isn't the same as control. Topanga ultimately makes her own decision and decides to stay. You can disagree with the decision, you can think the writers handled it poorly, but acting like Cory somehow forced her into this isn't exactly what happened. And then there's the other Shawn Hunter problem. And honestly, This is where a bad friend argument completely falls apart. Because if we're being honest, Cory spent most of his teenage years doing crisis management for Shawn. Shawn's life is very difficult, way harder than Cory's. His parents leave, his family situation is very unstable, he runs away, joins a cult, struggles with his identity, loses Mr. Turner, and then later on ends up losing his dad. Over and over again, Shawn's life falls apart, and who keeps showing up? Cory, every single time. Not perfectly, not always saying the right thing, not always handling things correctly, but he's there. When Shawn runs away, Cory goes after him. When Shawn is spiraling, Cory is there. When Shawn thinks he's worthless, Cory pushes back. When Shawn wants to quit on himself, Cory refuses to let him do that. Is Cory overbearing? Absolutely. But if we're going to criticize him, we should at least acknowledge the amount of emotional weight that he carried trying to keep his best friend together. I think the real reason people dislike Cory today because he's painfully human. He's emotional, he's insecure, he's stubborn, he's afraid to change. And unlike a lot of modern TV characters, he doesn't hide those flaws very well. Everything is right there on the surface. When he's jealous, you know it. When he's scared, you know it. And definitely when he's wrong, you absolutely know it. He doesn't look like a polished television hero. He looks like a teenager. And I think that's why people are so hard on him now. Because we're analyzing him like a full-formed adult. We're diagnosing him, labeling him, putting every mistake under a microscope. But that's not what Boy Meets World was really trying to do. It was a show about growing up, and growing up is messy. So no, Cory Matthews isn't perfect. He oversteps, he's selfish, makes mistakes, and he definitely deserves criticism. But the internet's version of Cory Matthews, the toxic manipulator, terrible friend, is a little bit out of bounds, guys. And we have to remember, this show was from the 90s. It was a completely different time back then. And I think that's a much fairer reading of the character than the one we usually hear today. So yeah, the internet may not agree, but I think Cory Matthews is a little bit more grace than he's getting.